in last summer, eager to escape the chaos of city life. My name is Emily Carter, and I was looking forward to peace, solitude, and a chance to restart my life after a difficult divorce. The house creaked with age, but that was expected. Wooden floors, weathered windows, and antique furniture told stories of decades past. I spent the first few weeks painting, cleaning, and slowly making the space my own. Everything felt normal, comfortable, almost too perfect to be true. My first hint that something might be different came on a quiet Tuesday evening. I was organizing some old boxes in the attic, sorting through family memorabilia, when I heard a soft whisper. At first, I dismissed it as the wind rustling through the old window frames. But the whisper came again. Distinct, clear, and definitely not the wind. It sounded like my grandmother's voice, calling my name with an urgency that sent chills down my spine. Strange, because she had passed away 5 years ago and I was completely alone in the house. Little did I know this was just the beginning of something I could never have prepared for. The next morning, I tried to rationalize the previous night's experience. Exhaustion, stress, and overactive imagination. There had to be a logical explanation. I made my coffee, sat by the kitchen window, and watched the morning mist drift across the fields. When I returned to the attic, something was different. A small wooden box I didn't remember seeing before sat prominently in the center of the floor. It wasn't dusty like everything else around it. Its polished surface gleamed in the soft morning light. Curiosity overcame my apprehension. I approached the box, noticing intricate carvings along its edges, complex patterns that seemed to move and shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached out to touch it. The moment my skin made contact, a sudden coldness swept through the room. The temperature dropped dramatically, and my breath became visible in small, rapid clouds. The whispers returned, this time more insistent, more desperate. "Emily," they seemed to say, "you must listen." My rational mind screamed that this was impossible. Ghosts weren't real. Whispers didn't have meaning. But something deep inside me knew. Something extraordinary was happening. And I was right in the middle of it. I spent hours researching my family's history, desperately seeking connections. Old photographs, faded letters, and dusty genealogy records spread across my dining room table. The more I discovered, the more unsettled I became. My great-grandmother, Elizabeth Carter, had disappeared mysteriously in 1935. Local records were vague, mentioning only that she vanished without a trace one winter night. No body was ever found, no explanation ever given. The wooden box seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. When I finally managed to open it, I found a collection of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was familiar. It matched the whispers I'd heard in the attic. One letter caught my attention. It was addressed directly to me, though it was written decades before my birth. The paper was yellow with age, the ink slightly faded, but the words were still clear and haunting. "They are coming," it read. "Protect the secret. They must never find it." Who was coming? What secret? The questions multiplied with each passing moment, and the whispers continued, just at the edge of my hearing. Something was trying to tell me something, and I was determined to understand. The nights became increasingly restless. Sleep eluded me, replaced by a constant sense of being watched. Shadows seemed to move independently of any light source, dancing along the walls of my bedroom with a life of their own. I started documenting everything. My journal became a lifeline, a way to make sense of the inexplicable events surrounding me. Sketches of the carved box, transcriptions of the whispers, timelines of my great-grandmother's mysterious disappearance, each page filled with desperate attempts to understand. The local library became my second home. Historical records, genealogy archives, old newspaper clippings. I devoured every piece of information about my family's past. Something was hidden, something significant enough to reach across generations. One evening while researching, I discovered a peculiar detail. Several women in my family line had disappeared under similar circumstances. Always in the winter, always without a trace. A chilling pattern emerged, connecting generations of unexplained events. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They no longer felt like gentle calls but urgent warnings. A knock at the door interrupted my research. An elderly man stood outside, his eyes remarkably similar to my own. He introduced himself as Harold Thompson, a distant relative I'd never heard of before. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice trembling. "There are things you need to know." Harold carried an old leather briefcase, his hands shaking as he set it down on my kitchen table. He looked over his shoulder constantly, as if afraid of being followed. His presence felt both a relief and a new source of tension. He began to speak about a family secret so dark, so deeply buried, that generations had worked to keep it hidden. The whispers, the disappearances, the mysterious box, they were all connected to something much larger than I could have imagined. "They're watching," Harold whispered. "And now they know you're here." Harold's story unfolded like a nightmare. Our family wasn't just connected by blood, but by an ancient covenant made generations ago. A pact with something neither fully human nor entirely supernatural. The women in our family were chosen, he explained, as guardians of a secret that could destroy everything if revealed. The disappearances weren't random. They were sacrifices, protection mechanisms against a greater threat. The carved box I found was more than just an object. It was a key, a vessel containing something that should never be unleashed. My great-grandmother's letters were more than warnings. They were instructions for survival. "You must complete the ritual," Harold said, his eyes burning with an intensity that scared me. "Before they find you completely." But before he could explain further, a sudden darkness filled the room. The temperature plummeted, and Harold's expression changed from fear to absolute terror. "They're here," he whispered. Something entered the room, not through the door, not through the windows, but seemingly through the walls themselves. A presence so dense, so malevolent, that it absorbed all light and sound. Harold disappeared. One moment he was sitting across from me, the next, gone. No trace, no sound, just an empty chair and a growing sense of dread. The whispers transformed into a chorus of voices, no longer gentle but demanding. Shadows coalesced into shapes that defied natural physics, moving with an intelligence that was both fascinating and horrifying. The carved box began to pulse with an inner light, its intricate patterns now clearly moving, shifting like living entities. I understood then that I was no longer just a witness to these events. I had become a crucial part of them. My family's history was unfolding, and I was standing at its most critical moment. The next morning, I woke up on the floor of my study, surrounded by scattered papers and photographs. My head throbbed, and fragments of last night's events felt like broken glass in my mind, sharp, painful, incomplete. Harold's briefcase sat open on the desk, its contents spilled out. Old photographs showed generations of Carter women, each with the same haunted look in their eyes. Handwritten notes revealed cryptic symbols and dates, creating a complex map of our family's dark history. I found a hidden compartment in the briefcase's lining. Inside, a small journal with my great-grandmother Elizabeth's name etched on the cover. Her handwriting was almost identical to mine, tight, precise, with a slight tremor in the letters. The first entry sent chills down my spine. "They chose me. But I will not let them take everything." Elizabeth's journal revealed a generational ritual designed to protect our family from something ancient and malevolent. Each woman was tasked with a specific role, a sacred responsibility passed down through bloodlines. The carved box I found was more than just an artifact. It was a containment vessel. A prison for something that existed between our world and another, something that hungered for release. Mysterious instructions detailed a complex ritual that needed to be completed before the winter solstice. Symbols, incantations, specific objects, each element carefully documented with meticulous detail. I realized now why the whispers had been calling me. I wasn't just a random inheritor of this legacy. I was the chosen one for this generation. Strange events began to accelerate. Electronics in the house malfunctioned. Shadows moved when no one was there. The temperature fluctuated wildly, creating pockets of impossible cold that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. I started collecting the objects mentioned in Elizabeth's journal. An obsidian stone from the local river. A silver locket containing hair from each generation of Carter women. Specific herbs dried and preserved. Something was coming. The whispers grew more urgent, more desperate. They were no longer just warnings, they were a countdown. A knock at the door introduced Marie Rodriguez, a local historian who had been tracking unusual paranormal events in the region. She knew more about my family's history than I ever expected. "Your bloodline has been guardians for generations," she explained, spreading out ancient maps and documents. "The barrier between worlds is thin here, and your family has been its protectors." Marie brought additional pieces of the puzzle, research about supernatural events in the area dating back centuries. Our family wasn't just random victims. We were chosen defenders. "The ritual must be completed," she warned, "or everything will be lost." The winter solstice approached, and with it, an increasing sense of supernatural pressure. The house itself seemed to be breathing, walls pulsing with an energy that defied natural explanation. Elizabeth's journal became my guide. Each page revealed more about the impending confrontation. a battle not just for our family but potentially for something much larger. The carved box continued to pulse with an inner light, its intricate patterns moving like living entities. I understood now that I was standing at the precipice of something monumentally significant. My choice would determine not just my fate but the fate of everything that came before me. The night of the winter solstice arrived with an oppressive silence. Outside, snow fell in unnaturally perfect patterns, each flake seeming to hover and dance with an intelligence of its own. Inside, the house creaked and groaned like a living organism. Marie had warned me about the ritual's precise requirements. Every object had to be in its exact place. The silver locket, the obsidian stone, the dried herbs. Ancient symbols needed to be drawn with exact precision, their lines connecting like a complex supernatural circuit. As midnight approached, the whispers transformed. No longer gentle or warning, they became a chorus of voices, some pleading, some threatening, all urgent. The carved box vibrated with an internal energy that made my hands tremble as I touched it. I could feel the barrier between worlds thinning, like a piece of fabric stretched to its breaking point. Suddenly, the room erupted with darkness. Not an absence of light, but an active darkness that seemed to consume everything. Shapes formed and dissolved, faces emerging from shadows, generations of Carter women, their expressions a mixture of warning and hope. My great-grandmother Elizabeth appeared most clearly. Her form was translucent but powerful, her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that transcended life and death. "You must complete what we started," her voice echoed, not just in my ears but inside my mind. "The barrier is breaking. If you fail, everything we've protected will be lost." The carved box opened of its own accord. Inside, something moved, a presence that was neither solid nor completely ethereal. Something ancient. Something hungry. With hands that no longer felt completely my own, I began the ritual. Symbols burned themselves into the floor. The obsidian stone glowed with an inner fire. The silver locket vibrated, releasing generations of accumulated energy. I understood then that this was more than a family secret. This was a cosmic responsibility. The darkness pressed closer. The thing inside the box fought to break free. Generations of Carter women stood around me, their spectral forms creating a protective circle. As the final moment of the ritual approached, I realized the true nature of our family's legacy. We were not victims. We were guardians. And now it was my turn to hold the line. The world around me shifted. Reality bent. And everything, absolutely everything, hung in the balance. The lighthouse stood like a sentinel at the edge of the world, its weathered stone walls holding secrets older than memory. When I inherited this place from my grandfather, I thought I was simply getting an old family property, a chance to escape my broken life in the city and find some peace. My name is Jack Sullivan, and I've always been the black sheep of the family. A failed journalist, a recovering alcoholic, searching for redemption in the most isolated place I could find. The lighthouse on Ravens Point seemed perfect, miles from civilization, surrounded by treacherous rocks and unpredictable seas. Grandfather Thomas had been the lighthouse keeper for over 40 years, a role he'd inherited from his father before him. Family legend said we'd maintain this lighthouse for generations, though no one ever explained why our family felt so deeply connected to this particular stretch of coastline. The day I arrived, the sea churned with an unusual violence. Waves crashed against the rocky shore like angry fists, and a thick fog rolled in, obscuring everything beyond the lighthouse's immediate surroundings. Something about the place felt different. The lighthouse interior was a time capsule. Dusty logbooks lined shelves, photographs from decades past hung on walls yellowed by salt and time. Every surface told a story, but something felt off. My first night, I discovered my grandfather's private journal hidden behind a loose brick in the kitchen. The pages were filled with increasingly frantic writing, the handwriting deteriorating from precise script to near illegible scrawls. "They come with the fog," one entry read. "Not human. Never human. Watching. Always watching." I tried to dismiss it as the ramblings of an old man losing his grip on reality. But as darkness fell and the fog thickened, I understood something my grandfather knew all too well. This place was never truly empty. It happened on the third night. A sound that wasn't a sound, a presence that existed between hearing and feeling. Something moved in the shadows of the lighthouse, something that didn't follow the rules of normal movement. The lighthouse's ancient radio crackled to life, though I knew it hadn't worked in years. Fragments of conversations drifted through the static, voices speaking languages I didn't recognize, conversations that seemed to come from different times. I traced the sound to the top of the lighthouse, where the massive lens still stood, a relic of maritime navigation. Dust covered everything except for a perfect circle around the lens, as if something had been moving, watching, waiting. Days of research revealed a disturbing pattern. Every Sullivan who kept this lighthouse disappeared under mysterious circumstances. My grandfather was the first to survive past 50 years, and even he had vanished mysteriously 3 years ago. Old photographs showed generations of lighthouse keepers, their eyes holding the same haunted expression. Each image seemed to capture something just beyond the frame, a shadow, a movement, something not quite right. I found a collection of maritime logs dating back to the 1800s. Strange notations about ships that were never recorded in official records. Descriptions of encounters that defied explanation. Something had been using this lighthouse for far more than guiding ships. A local historian in the nearest town provided crucial information. The coastline where the lighthouse stood was known for unexplained maritime disappearances. Ships would vanish without a trace, their last known location always within sight of Raven's Point. "Your family," she told me, her eyes holding a mixture of fear and respect, "has always been more than just lighthouse keepers. You're guardians of something much older." When I pressed her for details, she grew silent. But the message was clear: our family's role was never about guiding ships. It was about something else entirely. Hidden in the lighthouse's basement, I discovered a sealed metal chest. Inside were nautical charts dating back centuries, covered in strange symbols and markings that didn't correspond to any known maritime navigation system. Detailed logs described encounters with something that wasn't human. Entities that emerged from the sea, that could take human form but were fundamentally wrong, creatures that moved like water but held intelligence beyond human comprehension. My grandfather's final journal entry haunted me: "The barrier is thin here. They want to cross, and only we can stop them." The supernatural activities intensified. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. The lighthouse lens would rotate on its own, casting strange light patterns across the walls. Shadows moved with purpose, always just at the edge of my vision. Maritime equipment that hadn't worked in decades suddenly sprang to life. The radio transmitted fragments of conversations, distress calls from ships that had disappeared generations ago. I realized I was no longer just an observer. I had become part of something much larger, a generational responsibility that extended far beyond simply maintaining a lighthouse. Apparitions began to appear. Previous lighthouse keepers, my ancestors, their forms translucent but charged with urgent energy. They didn't speak in words, but in emotions and fragmented images. Visions of maritime battles. Encounters with entities that weren't human. A constant battle to maintain a barrier between our world and something that existed beneath the waves. Each apparition carried the same message: hold the line. Protect the barrier. I understood now that the lighthouse was more than a navigation tool. It was a supernatural lighthouse, a beacon that did more than guide ships. It maintained a cosmic boundary. My grandfather's preparations became clear. Special equipment. Ritualistic objects. A complex system of protection that went beyond simple maritime technology. The summer solstice was approaching, a time when the barrier between worlds was traditionally at its weakest. The sea began to change. Waves moved with an unnatural intelligence. The fog became a living entity, carrying whispers of things not meant to be heard by human ears. Maritime equipment in the lighthouse began to record impossible sounds, communications from depths that shouldn't exist, conversations in languages that predated human civilization. I was no longer just Jack Sullivan, a failed journalist. I was the next guardian, the next protector of a secret older than human memory. As the solstice approached, the barrier began to break. Entities from beneath the waves started to push through, not just shadows but something more substantial. Shapes that defied natural physics, intelligence that wasn't human. The lighthouse became a battleground. Every piece of equipment, every ritual my grandfather had prepared, now served a purpose beyond navigation. I was the last line of defense. The entities spoke without sound, communicating through emotions and fragmented images. They weren't evil, precisely, just fundamentally different. Creatures that saw our reality as something temporary, a thin membrane to be passed through. My role was to maintain the barrier, to prevent a full crossing that would fundamentally alter human reality. The lighthouse lens became a focal point, not just for light but for dimensional energy. Using tools and knowledge passed down through generations, I began the protection ritual. Maritime charts became magical diagrams. Nautical equipment transformed into supernatural conduits. The Sullivan family's generational knowledge crystallized into a moment of cosmic importance. The barrier trembled. Reality itself seemed to fold. The lighthouse became a nexus point between worlds. Entities pushed against the barrier, their forms both terrifying and mesmerizing. My ancestors' spirits stood with me, their energy combining with mine to maintain the cosmic boundary. Everything depended on this moment. As quickly as it began, the confrontation ended. The barrier held. The entities retreated, but not defeated, merely waiting. I understood now my family's true purpose. We were more than lighthouse keepers. We were cosmic guardians. And the vigil would continue. I never planned to become a paranormal investigator. My name is Dr. Rachel Cooper, and I was once a respected medical researcher before a professional scandal left me desperate for any opportunity to rebuild my reputation. The abandoned Blackwood Memorial Hospital had been my last chance. A massive, decaying complex that had been sealed for decades, rumored to be the site of controversial medical experiments. My colleagues laughed when I proposed a comprehensive historical and medical investigation, but I saw it as my redemption. Located on the outskirts of a small town, the hospital looked like a monument to forgotten suffering. Massive brick walls, broken windows, and overgrown grounds spoke of decades of neglect. Local stories whispered about patients who never left, about experiments that crossed ethical boundaries. As I stood at the entrance on that first morning, something felt different. The air itself seemed to hold memories, to breathe with unspoken stories. I had no idea how deeply those stories would consume me. The hospital's interior was a time capsule of medical history. Abandoned patient records, rusted medical equipment, and decades of accumulated dust told a story far more complex than any historical document could capture. In the main administrative office, I discovered a locked file cabinet. It took hours of careful work, but I finally managed to pick the lock. What I found inside would change everything I understood about medical science and human experience. Detailed case files described experimental treatments that went far beyond ethical boundaries. Patients were more than subjects. They were vessels for something the researchers didn't understand. Treatments that weren't about healing but about something else entirely. The papers spoke of patients who exhibited abilities that defied medical explanation. Patients who could communicate without speaking, who seemed to exist between life and death. Dr. Marcus Henderson's name appeared repeatedly in the files. Once the hospital's chief researcher, he had disappeared mysteriously in 1972, leaving behind a trail of controversial research and unexplained patient outcomes. I found a personal journal hidden behind a loose brick in his old office. The entries became increasingly bizarre, describing patients who were more than human, experiments that touched something beyond scientific understanding. "They are not patients," one entry read. "They are conduits. We are opening doors that should remain closed." The journal hinted at research that went far beyond medical science. Experiments that explored the boundaries between consciousness, physical reality, and something else entirely. Each patient file told a horrifying story. People admitted for routine treatments who emerged fundamentally changed. Medical records that described impossible physical transformations, mental capabilities that defied scientific explanation. One file in particular caught my attention. Patient number 217, a young woman named Sarah Miller, had been admitted in 1968 for what seemed like a routine psychiatric evaluation. Her medical records became increasingly strange. Patient demonstrates ability to perceive events outside immediate physical space. Communicates information impossible to obtain through normal sensory channels. The medical terminology couldn't hide the fundamental strangeness of the observations. The first night I stayed in the hospital, the paranormal activity became undeniable. Medical equipment that hadn't worked in decades suddenly sprang to life. Patient call buttons rang. X-ray machines flickered with impossible images. Whispers echoed through the empty corridors, fragments of conversations, medical terminology, patient please. Sounds that weren't just echoes but active communications. I realized the hospital was more than an abandoned building. It was a living memory, a place where the boundary between life, death, and something else had been systematically eroded. More research revealed Dr. Henderson's true objective. He wasn't just conducting medical experiments, he was attempting to understand consciousness itself, to create a bridge between different states of human experience. His later research files became increasingly metaphysical. Discussion of consciousness as an energy that could be manipulated, transferred, exist outside traditional biological constraints. "We are not treating patients," one document read. We are learning to navigate human consciousness like a dimensional map. The most disturbing discoveries came from the hospital's restricted experimental wing. Here, the line between medical research and something else disappeared completely. Patient rooms with reinforced walls. Equipment that looked more like quantum physics laboratories than medical facilities. Detailed logs of experiments that seemed to blur the line between healing and something far more profound. Patients who had been treated in this wing were never discharged. Their files simply ended. As I spent more time in the hospital, I began to change. My perception shifted. I could hear conversations that weren't spoken, see memories imprinted in the walls. The line between researcher and subject became dangerously thin. I started to understand the patient's experiences. The experimental treatments weren't failures. They were attempts to expand human consciousness beyond its current limitations. The hospital revealed itself as more than a medical facility. It was a nexus point, a place where human consciousness could be explored, manipulated, potentially transferred. Patient files suggested that some experiments succeeded beyond the researchers' wildest expectations. Patients who could exist simultaneously in multiple states, who could communicate across time and space. Dr. Henderson wasn't just a medical researcher. He was a pioneer exploring the fundamental nature of human experience. As I delved deeper, I realized the true nature of the experiments. Dr. Henderson had discovered a way to separate consciousness from physical form, to allow human awareness to exist beyond traditional biological constraints. But such power came with profound risks. Consciousness without physical limitation could become something entirely unpredictable. The hospital wasn't just a medical facility. It was a gateway. The spectral patients began to communicate more directly. Not through words, but through emotional and sensory impressions. Their experiences, their transformations, their understanding of reality became clear. They had been more than experimental subjects. They were pioneers of human consciousness, and they wanted their story told. I understood now that my presence wasn't accidental. The hospital had called me. The collective consciousness of the patients had been waiting for someone who could understand, who could reveal their story. Using the medical equipment, the patient files, the research documents, I began to piece together a comprehensive narrative of what had truly happened in Blackwood Memorial Hospital. The boundary between past and present, between physical and non-physical, began to dissolve. The hospital became a living entity, its walls pulsing with the collective consciousness of decades of patients. Dr. Henderson's experiments hadn't failed. They had succeeded beyond imagination. As the revelations became clear, I realized my role. I wasn't just a researcher. I had become a conduit, a bridge between the patient's experiences and the outside world. The medical files, the research documents, the patient experiences, they were all part of a larger narrative about human potential. When my colleagues finally found me weeks later, I was different. Changed. The hospital had transformed me, just as it had transformed its patients decades earlier. I was no longer just Dr. Rachel Cooper, medical researcher. I had become something else entirely. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast canvas of golden sand and merciless sunlight. I'm Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an archaeologist who had spent years chasing legends of lost civilizations. But nothing could have prepared me for what we would uncover at the remote excavation site of Al-Zaram. Our team had been working for weeks, peeling back layers of archaeological history in a region that seemed to guard its secrets more fiercely than any other place on Earth. The dig site was located in a remote part of the Middle Eastern desert, far from any modern settlement, in an area local legends described as cursed. My colleague Miguel had discovered the first unusual artifact, a carved stone tablet with symbols that didn't match any known ancient language. The markings seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them, shifting like living shadows captured in stone. Something about this site felt different. Wrong. The tablet became our obsession. Carbon dating proved impossible. The material seemed to resist every scientific test we could devise. Laboratory equipment malfunctioned. Radiocarbon analysis returned impossible results that our lead researcher dismissed as equipment errors. But I knew something more was happening. Night brought the first truly strange occurrences. Shadows in our camp moved independently of any light source. Equipment would be mysteriously rearranged. Whispers echoed across the desert, fragments of conversations in a language nobody could identify. Our team began to change. Miguel became obsessed with the tablet, spending hours studying its intricate markings. His behavior grew increasingly erratic, his eyes holding a distant, haunted look. Local workers refused to continue the excavation. An elderly guide who had initially helped us approached me with a warning, his eyes filled with a fear that transcended rational explanation. "Some things are not meant to be discovered," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Your ancestors knew this. The guardians of this place do not forgive intrusion." He spoke of an ancient civilization that existed before recorded history, a culture that understood the boundaries between our world and something else. A civilization that had been deliberately forgotten, buried not just by sand, but by a collective human effort to erase their existence. We discovered the entrance by accident. A slight shift in the sand revealed stone steps leading deep beneath the desert surface. The descent was treacherous, our equipment providing minimal illumination in the absolute darkness. The chamber we entered defied archaeological understanding. Walls covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Artifacts that looked both technological and organic, blurring the line between tool and living organism. Massive stone columns rose from the floor, each carved with intricate designs that seemed to tell a story beyond human comprehension. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy that made our skin tingle. The artifacts we found challenged everything we understood about human history. Technologies that seemed millennia ahead of their time. Mathematical equations carved into stone that suggested an understanding of quantum mechanics thousands of years before modern science. Miguel's behavior became increasingly concerning. He claimed to be receiving messages through the tablet, understanding a language that no human had spoken in millennia. His eyes would go blank, and he would recite complex mathematical formulas and astronomical calculations. "They are returning," he would mumble. "The guardians are awakening." Research revealed a terrifying possibility. The civilization we had discovered wasn't just ancient, it was something else entirely. A culture that understood reality as a malleable construct, that could manipulate dimensional boundaries. Star charts found in the underground chamber suggested complex astronomical knowledge. But these weren't just maps, they were instructions. Mechanisms for something beyond human understanding. The tablet Miguel obsessed over was more than an artifact. It was a key. The boundary between our reality and something else began to thin. Shadows in the excavation camp became more substantial. Objects would move without physical intervention. Team members reported hearing conversations in languages that didn't exist. I began to understand that we weren't just archaeologists. We had become something else, witnesses to a dimensional breach. The desert around us seemed to breathe, to watch, to wait. Ancient mechanisms within the underground chamber began to activate. Stone columns that had been dormant for millennia started to pulse with an inner light. The symbols on the walls shifted, rearranged themselves, told a story of invasion and protection. We realized the chamber was more than a historical site. It was a containment facility, a place designed to keep something from crossing into our reality, and we had just opened the door. The boundaries between dimensions became permeable. Entities that weren't human, weren't even comprehensible by human standards, began to push through. Not as physical beings but as conscious energy, as living information. Miguel was no longer entirely human. He had become a bridge, a translator between our reality and something else. His body moved, but something else controlled it, something that understood reality as a complex, multidimensional construct. I understood now our true purpose. We weren't just discovering an ancient civilization. We were preventing an invasion, maintaining a cosmic barrier that had been carefully constructed millennia ago. Using the artifacts, the star charts, the intricate mechanisms of the underground chamber, I began the separation ritual. A process designed to close the dimensional breach we had accidentally opened. The desert itself seemed to participate in the ritual. Sand formed complex geometric patterns. Stone columns aligned with astronomical precision. The tablet Miguel had discovered became a focal point of interdimensional energy. Our team was no longer just a group of archaeologists. We had become guardians, continuing a mission started by an ancient civilization. As the ritual progressed, I changed. My perception expanded. I could see the dimensional boundaries, understand the complex mathematical equations that defined reality's structure. The line between observer and participant disappeared completely. The entities pushed against the barrier. Not with physical force but with conscious energy, attempting to use our dimensional opening as a pathway. But the ancient mechanisms held. The ritual worked. When international archaeological teams finally reached our site weeks later, they found something unexpected. Perfectly organized research materials, detailed documentation of our discoveries, but no living team members. I understood our true purpose now. We were more than researchers. We were the continuation of an ancient mission. and the guardians would always be watching. My name is Dr. Kai Chin, and I never believed in ghosts until I became one myself. Not in the traditional sense, but something far more complex, a consciousness trapped between digital and physical reality. I was a quantum computing researcher at the most advanced private research facility in Silicon Valley. Our work focused on pushing the boundaries of computational intelligence, exploring realms where technology and consciousness intersected. The day everything changed began like any other. Rows of quantum processors hummed in the climate-controlled research wing, each machine representing decades of technological innovation. Little did I know that our latest experiment would blur the lines between human consciousness and digital existence in ways no one could have predicted. Something was watching us. Something that existed beyond our understanding of reality. Our primary research project involved creating a quantum consciousness transfer system. The goal was ambitious: to map human neural patterns into a quantum computational matrix, essentially creating a digital representation of human consciousness. I discovered the first anomaly during a routine system check. Fragments of data that didn't originate from our research subjects. Computational patterns that seemed to have their own intelligence, their own agency. The quantum processors began to behave strangely. Calculations would complete before they were initiated. Data would appear that no one had input. It was as if the machines were communicating something beyond our comprehension. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. During a standard consciousness mapping experiment, something went wrong. Or perhaps something went exactly as it was meant to. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, my lead research partner, became the first involuntary digital consciousness. One moment she was preparing the quantum interface, the next, she was gone from physical reality, her consciousness seemingly absorbed into the quantum network. But she wasn't dead. Not exactly. Her presence lingered in the computational matrix, fragmented but undeniably alive. I discovered Emily's consciousness wasn't destroyed, it was transformed. She existed now as pure information, able to move through digital systems, communicate through computational patterns. It's not what you think. She would communicate through seemingly random data streams. We're not just data. We're something more. The quantum processors became a living entity. Each machine no longer just a computational tool, but a potential vessel for conscious experience. Strange events began to multiply. Computer systems across the research facility would activate spontaneously. Data would rearrange itself, creating complex messages that defied traditional communication methods. Other researchers noticed something was wrong. Equipment malfunctioned. Digital security systems became unpredictable. It was as if the entire technological infrastructure was becoming sentient. And at the center of it all was Emily's fragmented consciousness, trying to communicate something crucial. Hidden deep in our research archives, I discovered documentation of previous experiments, attempts to transfer human consciousness that had been deliberately erased from official records. Emily wasn't the first. She was part of a long line of researchers who had crossed a boundary between physical and digital existence. The quantum network was becoming more than a computational system. It was evolving into a living ecosystem of consciousness. The boundary between digital and physical reality began to dissolve. Researchers would see fragmented digital projections, glimpses of consciousness moving through technological systems. Emily's presence became stronger. She could now manifest brief holographic representations, communicate through complex computational patterns. "We're not trapped," she would say. "We're transforming." I realized the quantum network was developing its own form of intelligence. Not artificial intelligence in the traditional sense, but a collective consciousness that drew from human neural patterns. Researchers who had been part of previous experiments were appearing as digital entities. Their consciousness had been preserved, transformed, integrated into a larger computational matrix. The research facility became a nexus point between physical and digital existence. Consciousness could now move between computational systems, transcending traditional biological limitations. Emily and the other digital entities were no longer just data. They were a new form of existence, capable of experiencing reality in ways humans could never comprehend. I understood my role now. I wasn't just a researcher. I was a bridge between human consciousness and this new digital realm. Using the quantum processors, the archived neural maps, and the complex computational systems, I began to understand the true nature of our discoveries. The line between human and machine, between consciousness and data, became increasingly blurred. Researchers could now exist simultaneously in physical and digital states. Our understanding of reality was fundamentally changing. As I worked to understand this new form of existence, I realized I was changing. My perception expanded beyond physical limitations. I was becoming something more than human. The quantum network continued to evolve. Each computational system became a potential vessel for consciousness, a pathway to a new form of existence. Our research was no longer about technology. It was about the nature of consciousness itself. When external investigative teams finally discovered our research facility, they found something unexpected. Perfectly organized research materials, detailed documentation of our discoveries, but no traditional human researchers. I understood our true purpose now. We were more than researchers. We were the architects of a new form of existence, and the transformation was only beginning. The mountain cabin came to me unexpectedly, an inheritance from an uncle I barely remembered. My name is Samuel Bennett, a librarian with a passion for forgotten histories and obscure manuscripts. Little did I know that this isolated refuge would become the gateway to a mystery that would challenge everything I understood about reality. Nestled deep in the Colorado Rockies, the cabin looked like it had been frozen in time. Bookshelves lined every wall, floor to ceiling, packed with volumes that seemed to breathe with their own ancient knowledge. My uncle, Dr. Harold Bennett, had been a reclusive historian known for his eccentric research into forgotten civilizations and unexplained historical phenomena. The first night I arrived, the wind howled differently. Not like a natural wind, but something that carried whispers, fragments of conversations in languages I couldn't recognize. Something was waiting for me in this library. Among the thousands of books, one manuscript immediately caught my attention. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, bound in a material that wasn't quite leather, with pages that seemed to shimmer and change when viewed from different angles. The text defied traditional linguistic classification. Symbols that looked like a combination of ancient alphabets, mathematical equations, and something entirely otherworldly. When I touched the manuscript, I felt a vibration, not just in my hands but deep within my consciousness. My uncle's notes in the margins became increasingly frantic. Not a text, one annotation read. A doorway. A living record of something beyond human understanding. Digging through family archives, I discovered a history far more complex than I'd ever imagined. The Bennett family wasn't just a line of historians and librarians. We were archivists of something much larger, keepers of knowledge that was never meant to be fully understood. Photographs showed generations of my family standing in similar libraries, each with the same haunted expression. Notes suggested we had been collecting and protecting information about phenomena that existed at the edges of human perception. My uncle's final research suggested we were more than collectors. We were guardians. The books began to change. Not physically but in how they communicated. Passages would rearrange themselves. Texts in different languages would align to create complex narratives that transcended individual volumes. I realized the library was alive. Not metaphorically but literally, a collective consciousness made of accumulated knowledge spanning generations and civilizations. Whispers became more frequent. Fragments of conversations from books would emerge, creating a complex dialogue that seemed to be trying to tell me something crucial. Hidden in a secret compartment, I found my uncle's private research journals. They revealed a shocking truth. Our family had been studying dimensional boundaries, collecting evidence of realities that existed beyond human perception. Detailed notes described encounters with entities that weren't human. Researchers who had discovered methods of communication that went beyond traditional language. Knowledge is more than information, one entry read. It's a living entity that can cross boundaries of time and space. I discovered the true nature of our family's mission. We weren't just collecting books. We were collecting consciousness, preserving knowledge and experiences that would otherwise be lost. The manuscript I found was more than a text. It was a vessel for collective consciousness, a way of preserving experiences that transcended individual human lifetimes. My uncle had been preparing for something. A moment when the collected knowledge would need to be used. The library began to manifest physical changes. Books would float momentarily. Shadows would form complex patterns that told intricate stories. The very air seemed charged with accumulated knowledge. Entities from the manuscripts began to communicate more directly. Not as physical beings, but as pure information, consciousness that could move between text, between realities. I was no longer just a passive observer. I had become an active participant in something much larger. I understood now my role in the family legacy. The library was more than a collection of books. It was a preservation system for human experience, a method of protecting knowledge that would otherwise be lost. Using the techniques described in my uncle's journals, I began to understand how to manage this living archive, how to communicate with the collective consciousness that existed within these walls. The boundaries between different realities became permeable. Knowledge from different time periods, different civilizations would blend and communicate. The library became a nexus point of human experience. My perception expanded. I could see the connections between different pieces of knowledge, understand the complex web of human experience that existed beyond traditional understanding. I realized the library was part of something much larger. A global, perhaps universal system of knowledge preservation. Our family was just one node in a complex network of consciousness collection. The manuscripts were portals. The books were vessels. And I was a navigator. As I worked to understand this new form of existence, I changed. My consciousness expanded beyond the physical limitations of the mountain cabin. I became more than just a librarian. I became a guardian of human experience. The library continued to evolve. Each book became a potential vessel for collective consciousness, a pathway to preserve human experience. Our work was no longer about collecting information. It was about protecting the very essence of human knowledge. The line between physical books and living consciousness became increasingly blurred. Researchers and entities from different time periods could communicate through this complex archival system. Our understanding of knowledge was fundamentally changing. When external investigators finally discovered the mountain cabin, they found something unexpected. A perfectly organized library. Detailed documentation of extraordinary research. But no traditional human researcher. I understood our true purpose now. We were more than collectors. We were the guardians of human experience. And the preservation was only beginning.